Hey, welcome back to Open Scripture, where we seek to sharpen the way the church understands her foundational texts. My name is Nick Nail. Here with me is Dr. Tracy McKenzie, and we're just going to jump right back into our conversation of Genesis 1 from the very first verse we just came out of. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And what we emphasized in the last episode is God created everything in verse 1. Creation happened already. We haven't even entered the conversation of the first day and days 1 through 6 and all that takes place here. We're starting verse 2 now. And so again, the format of this podcast is kind of like a live commentary where we get to hear from Tracy kind of some of his thoughts and interpretation, and I get to interrupt and ask some questions and maybe summarize some things. And we just want to make this understandable, and some of this is maybe a little different than the way you've heard Genesis, heard the creation story. So we are aware of that. So we will probably reiterate some things and repeat some things over and over just because we really want to nail this down. It's like there's something happening here, and ultimately it gets to man being created and God preparing this place for man to dwell.
Yeah. Sixth day, of course, like we said last time, is where this entire subunit or chapter is heading. And that's where our attention is really going to focus. But we're clearing away some things before we get there. By the way, would really appreciate it if you can follow or subscribe or like or share what we're doing here. Of course, we're on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And we have something special planned in about 3 or 4 episodes when we finish this first subunit, which will be after the 7th day in Genesis 2:3. We want to have a question answer time. We want you to send your questions to us, and we're going to take an entire episode answering those questions. So we'll let you know more about that later, but we certainly like to do that because we know there's some things here in Genesis 1 that maybe we're not getting to, other things that maybe you aren't so sure about and want to ask a follow-up question. So we'd love to hear from you. Again, be planning on doing that so that we can answer those questions in Genesis 1. Speaking of this episode, verse 2, basically the summary of this episode is this is the status of creation before we even enter the days. Now, that should take you back to the cliffhanger that we left you on last time, but let me just again reiterate that. This episode is about the status of God's creation that happened in Genesis 1:1 before we even enter the days. So we're going to be talking about things here. We're going to be talking about this issue of formless and void. That's this little 2-word phrase here that's translated in some of our translations that way. We're going to be talking about this word, and the earth was, right? The earth here. We're going to be dealing a little bit with that. Finally, we're going to be talking about what does it mean that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the great deep. So there's 2 or 3 places we're going to go in this episode. Now, Nick, if you remember, I kind of left us on a cliffhanger last time. I said we had some what I would consider proof that we can see that creation happened in Genesis 1:1, and here it is.
Well,
Right?
let's back up. So
Okay.
when a lot of people read Genesis 1, they're thinking that creation starts when we get to day 1,
Yep.
when God, starts doing things where we think he's doing things.
Right.
But what you pointed out was in verse 1, he already did something.
Yep.
The action already took place
Action already took
in
place.
verse 1, where God created the heavens and the earth. We understood that as a figure of speech, just meaning God created everything.
Yep.
So everything's created. And now verse 2, we're entering back into the story where we're picking up where God had already created.
Yep.
And now we see the status of creation, or the earth,
Yep.
as we see, and what he's going to do next.
Right. Right, that's right. So again, we ask the question, is verse 1 a summary or is it literally a statement? And again, we settled pretty firmly on the fact, no, this is a statement. God had done this, or God did this then. So now in verse 2, when we open up, he had done this, and here's the proof. Verse 2, the first word of verse 2 is and the earth. That's one word in Hebrew. And the earth was. So we see here the to be verb paired with the word earth or land. We'll talk more about the earth and the land here in a second. But this just tells us that, hey, the earth was existing at this point.
Was being past tense, so it had to already be there.
Yeah, yeah. What exactly? Right? It had to already be there. And also, we're going to talk more about this formless and void, but it's not saying that it was just a gaseous black hole of nothingness. We'll come back to that later. But we might also notice the great deep, presumably the waters in some way, and the waters. So all of these things were already existing. And verse 2 says, yes, these things are there. So we know that these things existed because verse 2 tells us they existed.
Yeah.
So something had to happen in verse 1. And again, because we see the figure of speech called a merism, heavens and earth, this totality, we can say, oh, okay, everything was created. And so then again, when the days begin in verse 3 is when day 1 is going to begin. We're going to see, oh, what is God doing then in the rest of the chapter?
Yeah. So verse 1, God created everything. Verse 2, we're stepping into a continuation, or maybe not a continuation, but we're stepping into another explanation even.
Yeah, I mean, we could say, okay, here's the status basically. Here's what's going on with the creation from Genesis 1. And in reality, again, I don't want to go into this too much, but both of these first 2 verses are clauses, we could say, or sentences, which are giving us the circumstances of what is going to then be the background to verse 3.
Yeah.
So again, it's another indication grammatically, or we could say syntactically, that's a fancy word for the way the words are put together.
Yeah.
That this had already happened. This is all in the background.
Yeah. So let me read the English version and of all of verse 2, and then I want to hear what stands out, with your Hebrew. So in verse 2, where we're going to be, now the earth was formless and empty, is what the CSB says. ESV says formless and void.
Okay.
Darkness covered the surface of the watery depths.
Okay.
And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters.
Okay, good.
So then the first clause, now the earth was formless and empty.
Yeah, so the first thing we need to focus on here is this word earth.
Yeah.
It's the same word that is up in verse 1, the heavens and the earth. But of course, there's these 2 words form this unified concept, right?
Right.
Here, the author now is really moving our attention to what we could call the earth.
So we're actually talking about the earth.
We're talking about
just
the
a figure of
earth.
speech.
And really, another often translated way to translate this, which is the way it's going to be translated later in this chapter and in chapter 2, is this was the land.
The land.
Right? So we could say, and this is important, we could say that the author is already turning the reader's focus to the specific concept of the land. Now, I'm fine to translate
like the promised land that eventually they'll get to.
This is connected directly to the promised land because this land here is connected to the garden in Genesis 2.
Yeah.
And the garden in Genesis 2, because of the rivers in Genesis 2, verses 10 through 14, those rivers, 2 of those rivers are the very rivers that make up the promised land in Genesis 15:18.
So this might get a little controversial, but it's one way that I've learned how to read Genesis 1 is that we maybe have been too influenced by our understanding of the cosmos and of space. And so when you say the word earth, we immediately think of the globe. We
Right.
think of this sphere being the globe,
Right.
being Earth. When you use the word Earth, you're not thinking about the ground, or you're not thinking about like a plot of land, because that's not how we use the word Earth anymore. But when we hear the word land, which is another way to interpret this, and we're thinking that this probably has some relation to the promised land, that there's one way to interpret this as the land was formless and void, and it's eventually talking about the land, the specific plot of land
Yeah.
that God is creating for, eventually Adam and Eve,
Yep.
being the garden, and that it might not even be talking about the whole globe. That's maybe controversial to say,
Yeah.
but that's maybe just one way to think about it. Because
Right.
if we're
Right.
talking about land, well, what does land mean here in this
Yeah.
context?
Yeah. So we could back up a little bit, because the author, when he says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? The heavens and the earth. He's going to go on in this chapter. He's going to talk more about what the heavens are,
Yeah.
and he's going to talk more about what the earth is,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think your point is a good one,
Yeah.
because in this first word, and the earth was, we should not be thinking of the globe.
Okay.
We should be thinking of the dirt,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. It's kind of what the author is standing on.
Yeah.
Now, I personally don't think it's limited to the garden.
Okay.
I think this is he's still talking about the entire earth as it relates to all of the ground, we could
Okay.
say,
Yeah.
of the earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Although, again, don't think sphere,
Yeah.
where we see,
Like a planet.
yeah,
Yeah.
don't think planet or galaxy.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
we could have thought that in verse 1, heavens
Yeah.
and the earth.
Right.
But again, I think we have to remember that the author never had the Hubble telescope or the James Webb telescope.
Right.
He had never peered into outer space, right? And
Mhm.
again, I don't really even think he had a globe,
Yeah.
right? So it's unusual for him to
Yeah.
be thinking that way.
So it's not crazy to think that, in a limitation of God preparing the land and relating it to the promised land and the land of Eden specifically, but you're going to say this is the earth, this is
This is
everything.
the earth.
This
This is
isn't just
everything. Right,
exclusive
right.
to that.
But there is a connection, and this is important because
Yeah.
we're thinking about coherence. How
Yeah.
does Genesis 1 fit with Genesis 2? How does Genesis 2 fit with Genesis 15 and the
Yeah.
promised land?
Mhm.
And the author wants us to connect these,
Yeah.
because Genesis 2 is going to have an explicit connection to
Mhm.
Genesis 1. The garden
Yeah.
is going to have an explicit connection to this land.
Okay.
And then again, Genesis 2, the garden, is
Mhm.
going to have an explicit connection to the promised land.
Yeah.
So already the author has revealed his other main idea, and that is the land that he's going to give to Abraham. And I want to put the land here, if you'll permit me, because it's going to be a few episodes before we get there. I want to put the land here, or the earth, in kind of scare quotation marks, because we still have to think a lot about what the land is,
Mhm.
right? And again, this will be another kind of controversial topic that we'll hit later on. But anyway, there you have it. We should be thinking of the dirt that the
Mhm.
author is standing on, which I think, again, is the whole earth's
Yeah.
land. I don't think this is not like merely the garden, in
Okay.
my opinion.
Right.
Right. And you can, disagree with me there if you want. We can talk about that,
Yeah.
what that might look like. So now let's move to this concept of formless. I think the CSB went formless and empty.
Yep.
ESV went formless and void, right? And
Without form and void.
without
Yeah.
form and void. And again, we can go to some other places that the author uses these two terms. One of those places is Jeremiah 4:23. While you're turning there, let me just say that this without form and void, or without form and empty, some commentators have taken this to be that the author is, in days 1 through 3, is going to tell us how he is now forming this land.
Mm-hmm.
And then days 4 through 6, this is how he's filling it up.
Because it's formless and
Right?
it's empty.
Yes. This in particular is a guy named Kenneth Matthews in a particular commentary. And I really like that. I'm not going to go there exactly. I don't think that's the main point, but we are going to see this in days 1 through 3 and 4 through 6. This is going to be part of our
Yeah.
unpacking of this.
Yeah, I think another common way that this formless and void we think about, again, just because of our modern scientific understanding of and influence of like space and stuff, you think of this like cosmic chaos.
Yeah, and that's where we
Yeah.
should not go.
Yeah, that's
Right.
not what's happening.
I think in particular for my generation, where it seems like in my generation we were talking a lot about science. I mean, kind of some of these scientific theories were really finding their foundation in our culture, and I think Christians, were kind of having to deal with this.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to figure out what I thought of these different theories, and I read a lot of kind of creationists who were talking about, black holes, and I was seeing the James Webb Telescope, and so for me, this kind of without form and void, what I originally thought of this way back when was I thought, oh, this is a black hole. So in other words, there's nothing here.
Yeah.
But again, that's not the idea here. Let's go to Jeremiah, and we'll hear basically how another biblical author understands this. What was that? Jeremiah 4:23.
Yep.
And why don't you back up a verse and then go a verse or two longer?
Okay. So Jeremiah 4:22 says, "For my people are fools, they do not know me. They are foolish children without understanding. They are skilled in doing what is evil, but they do not know how to do what is good. I looked at the earth, and it was formless and empty."
All right, so I'm going to have you pick up reading again here just a second. So in 4:23, he literally says, "I have seen the Eretz." That's this word in Genesis 1:2 and in Genesis 1:1, same exact word. So he's going to be talking. You can tell he's looking at Genesis 1 as he's also looking around him, and we're going to see what he's looking at. I just wanted to point out this is Genesis 1 terminology.
Yeah.
I looked at the earth, and what did I see?
It was formless and empty.
So there's our two words. That's the two words, same exact words. Right? Now let's read on and see what he's seeing here.
Okay. I looked to the heavens, and their light was gone.
All right. So heavens, that's the word in 1:1. Light is the word that's going to be in 1:3. So he's obviously looking at Genesis 1:1 or Genesis 1 as he's looking also around him. Now look at verse 24.
I looked at the mountains, and they were quaking, and all the hills shook.
All right. So there's no mountains and hills in Genesis 1.
Yeah.
Right? So he's looking around. He's describing what he's seeing in the terminology of Genesis 1. But notice he's not saying, I see black holes and I see a gaseous expanse. I see the universe. I see a billion galaxies. None of that.
Yeah.
He's seeing mountains that are quaking.
Yeah.
Hills that are shaking.
The ground in front of him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I looked, and there was no human being.
All right. That's the word man, Genesis 1.
And all the birds of the sky had fled.
Again, birds of the sky. These are the birds of the heaven. This is Genesis 1.
I looked, and the fertile field was a wilderness.
Okay, so now you can see again what he's saying. This fertile field of Israel is now a desert. It's a wilderness. This is the Sahara Desert.
Yeah.
Right? This is Death Valley. Okay, keep going.
All its cities were torn down because of the Lord and his burning anger.
All right. So again, he's even seeing cities. So again, the point is not that he's seeing black holes and gaseous expanse. He's seeing how the Lord had basically destroyed Israel or allowed Israel to be exiled because of their idolatry.
Yeah.
And after Babylon came through, it was like a wilderness.
It was because there was nobody there, nobody inhabiting it, and then it just turned into this chaos of a wilderness.
And the army had gone through there and had torn things down.
Okay.
Right? And it literally cut down trees. And had torn cities down.
Yeah.
Now, again, we don't need to go there, I don't think, because I think this makes the point. But Isaiah 34:11 also uses the two terms, basically says the same thing. Let's go to Deuteronomy 32:10 because that's in the Pentateuch. And we'll see this kind of same thing go on here.
In 32:10, I'll start at verse before. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his own inheritance. He found him in a desolate land, in a barren, howling wilderness. He surrounded him, cared for him, and he protected him as the pupil of his eye.
All right. So there we see the word that is often translated without form. So it's the first of our terms in Genesis 1:2. And he says, this is a wilderness. This is a desert. He found him in a desert land. And what did yours say? In a howling wilderness?
Howling wilderness.
So the howling wilderness, or read that whole clause.
He found him in a desolate land, in a barren, howling wilderness.
Okay, so probably the word barren there is translating the word without form from verse 2.
Okay.
So my entire point, looking at all of that, is again, he's looking at a desert. If you want to have a conception, a picture of what this might be, you know, if you've seen pictures, I hate to do this because it can take us back to outer space, but if you think about the surface of Mars, right, that you've seen on pictures, right, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about basically desolation, just like a wilderness, a desert, right? Just
uninhabitable.
Like uninhabitable. That's right. No trees, no structures. I mean, maybe some water somewhere, but maybe it's down in the subground, and things like that.
And so that's what we need to have in mind, is this just kind of abandoned wilderness desert before God starts working in it.
Yes. Now, one thing that we need to make sure we get straight, though, there's nothing negative here.
Sure.
Right. This is not a description of chaos or destruction or anything. That comes from another couple theories that we'll talk about later. But there's nothing negative here.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
This is the status of the creation, i.e., the land or the earth. Okay?
Yep.
All right, so that's great. That basically takes us then through, you know, the second of our two things that we were going to talk about. The main thing we have left here is this Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. One more thing we could quickly add was there's darkness over the surface or over the face of the great deep. And all that we need to say here is, again, the darkness also is not negative necessarily. God is described in darkness. Every time it appears, almost, he's described in darkness and also fire. So there's no negative thing there necessarily either. And, of course, we're going to get the light when the days begin in verse 3. So more on that to come.
So if the earth or the land is a desert, this kind of vast wilderness, but then darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, where did the water come from?
Well,
is there water and there's a desert?
You can go to the other version, like the ESV here, but there's no water in this particular phrase. This is literally, it's the face of the great deep, which implies waters. But just so we know, the word is not there.
Yeah, ESV says, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. ESV, the surface of the watery depths.
No. So the ESV, read the whole verse there, if you would, please.
The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep.
All right, that's it. That's it.
Okay.
Right. So the ESV again.
Yeah.
The deep is water, I think. But again, just so we know, the CSB adds the word water there.
Depths,
watery depths. And then again, in the next clause, there's also the word water, which there is, of course, in the Hebrew.
Yeah. Okay.
So all I want to say there is, hey, darkness is here. And again, the Lord's going to move in day one to dispel the darkness with light. Okay? We'll say more on that.
And to make it inhabitable eventually till we get to day 6. Is that the case?
To make what inhabitable?
To make the land inhabitable for man to come on day 6.
Yes. That's what you mean. Talking about the light?
I'm talking about the condition of the earth as we read it in verse 2, and then God starting to do something with it in order to make it inhabitable.
That's right. Yeah, in verse 3, which is day 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Now, the Spirit of God was hovering. There's several different ways we could go here. I think I want to first of all describe this idea of hovering, and this is the word picture here. That really, this word really is and comes from is a bird flapping its wings over its nest.
Hmm.
This is Deuteronomy 32:11,
Mm-hmm.
which is one verse after we
Right.
just read about the, without form,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it describes basically God as hovering or fluttering its wings over its young,
Hmm.
right? That's how the Lord found Israel in this desert place and cared for them.
Wow.
So here, the Spirit of God is described in this way. And again, this shouldn't really surprise us
Hmm.
because the Spirit of God is often used as active over water. We could think
Hmm.
of the parting of the waters at the sea,
Yeah.
right? That's described. The Spirit of God was active, or the Spirit was active over the water and blew it back. And it probably is translated as a wind because
Mm-hmm.
wind and spirit is the same word.
Yeah.
Also, the crossing of the Jordan in
Mm-hmm.
Joshua 4,
Yeah.
same thing. I mean, I even think of the Spirit coming on Jesus at his baptism, right?
Like a
This
dove.
water, like a dove,
Huh.
right? It's like it came down as a spirit,
Yeah.
right? We could think also, just to go back to the Old Testament, we could think of the dove in the ark, how the Spirit of God blew the waters back and
Yeah.
dried things out. And sure enough, a dove is right there showing kind of the way.
Hmm. So in our Lion King series, we pointed that the race sheet not kind of, but does point to the Son, the coming future
Mm-hmm,
King.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there we have God the Son. And now, can we say that the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, that this is explicitly, maybe a Trinitarian reference here?
Yeah.
Like we have this, already have the Son, now we have the
Yeah,
Spirit.
yeah. Well, most Old Testament scholars would, of course, roll their eyes at that,
Yeah.
right? Because again, I think a lot of people are merely thinking about, again, when Moses or again, whoever they think the author was, whether it's 1400 BC or 700 BC
Hmm.
for that particular scholar, they would think, okay, no, there's of course no doctrine of the Trinity, and so
Mm-hmm.
of course not. And but my point is, well, you've got God in verse 1, obviously, God created.
Mm-hmm.
You got the Spirit of God here in verse 2.
Yeah.
Like you said, the Bereshit has associations with the Lion King, the Son
Mm-hmm.
of God, who's called the Most High. I personally don't have a problem with it. And the Trinity has existed for all eternity,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So no problem.
Hmm.
And if you still balk at that, then it's like, well, we have the seed of the woman, who, again, in the context of the book of Genesis and in the context of the book called the Pentateuch, the seed of the woman is the son of Judah, who is, in Numbers 24, called the Most High God.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I have no problem with it being a Trinitarian reference, as long as we, again, unpack it within the context of this book that the author gave us.
Yeah.
But again, most Old Testament, scholars would, I think, scoff at that idea.
Hmm.
But there it is. There it is. So anyway, one thing then I think we should talk about here, and that is, how does this help us get to day 6? How does that help us get to day 6?
Yeah.
And one thing we could think about again is, now God has some work to do, right? We've talked about the status of creation. It's not inhabitable for man right now.
Mm-hmm.
Man cannot exist on the surface of Mars, and neither could he have existed, or mankind, could have existed on the surface at this point. So now the rest of Genesis 1 is going to talk about how he went to work preparing this land, this
Mm-hmm.
earth, for human inhabitation. Again, in a sense, as a gift,
Yeah.
or at the very least as provision
Mm-hmm.
for man and woman to steward. So another thing that we could think about here, and again, I hate to bring this up, But I think probably some of you are asking this question. And again, this is not to be controversial. I don't even want to really bring this up.
Kind of have to.
But you kind of have to. And this is, of course, the whole age of the universe.
Yeah.
Right? Which to me is not really a question that the author is really asking.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think, we, again, in our current understanding of just science and technology and all these advancements, it's easy to see historically how Bible interpreters and pastors and theologians and scientists have tried to manipulate or use this text to try to prove or disprove certain scientific theories,
Right.
and maybe missing the whole point of what the author is trying to
Yep.
say.
Yep.
And so then, there are a lot of questions. For people that this might trip them up, as far as like, this is not a good scientific explanation of how the earth was created. So what does this mean? Is the earth, millions or billions of years old, or is it, a few thousand years old? It's like, how do we handle these questions? Is it worth asking? And, I think I think it's obvious that this is not what the author's answering.
Right.
But what do we do for these people that this is how they've understood Genesis 1 for so long, to
Right.
be a response to this question of
Yeah.
evolution or creationism, all these things?
Let me take us two different directions.
Yeah.
All right, in this. And the first direction, I don't want to go too far.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the concept of genre. Have we talked about genre yet?
Oh, yeah.
On
We
the
talked
podcast?
a little bit about genre.
All right. So we talked about, maybe poetry,
Mhm.
or we could talk about narrative, those types of things. Well, again, from a rudimentary point of view, we could just say that this is not a scientific. The point of this text is not, the genre is not modern science.
Mm-hmm.
Moses here is not thinking, let me write a science text that will be understood in the framework or with the details, with the language of 2026.
Yeah, right.
And again, we can go into why that is the case,
Mm-hmm.
but at the very least, if he did, obviously nobody would have understood him until 2026,
Yeah.
let's say, or 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we can get into more of that genre. It's very important that we understand this is not a modern genre, because again, Moses didn't have that available to him. This is an ancient genre. So he's not talking about this from the perspective of modern science. So to make
Mhm.
this a science text is really misunderstanding it.
Yeah. And I think there's some answers to this. Some people, there's, evolutionary creationists that try to explain God using evolution to bring about all this stuff. Or you have people that have like the gap theory, that there's this indeterminate amount of time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. But again, those don't really get to the point of the text.
No, and I'm not interested in any scientific view and
Yeah.
trying to bring that into an understanding of Genesis 1. Now,
Yeah.
again, none of us are blank slates, right?
Mhm.
We all have our biases and we all have our ideas that we
Yeah.
bring to the text, and you can't interpret the text without those.
Yeah.
All right, that's again another topic for another day. But my point here is not to try to fit as many years as possible in this text, or to explain it
Mm-hmm.
in a way that fits it in with theistic evolution at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And it's not what I believe.
Yeah.
Right. First of all, but second of all, I want to understand this
Mhm.
again as close as possible to the purposes of the author.
Yeah.
So
So-
what I
go
want
ahead.
to say here is, again, though, I'm just trying to understand what is here.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't even gotten to day 1.
Mm-hmm.
And Genesis 1:2 is saying that the earth already existed.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the gap theory.
Yeah.
We're not talking about any negative view of
Uh-huh.
the earth here in Genesis 1:2, and we're not trying to fit, we're not trying to fit the fall of Satan into this. This is all kind of this gap theory
Yeah.
idea. All I'm saying is that we haven't gotten to day 1 yet.
Yeah.
and the earth is already existing. So
and the age probably doesn't even matter.
it doesn't matter. No, of course it doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't matter. I
No.
mean, I can accept a young Earth theory. I can accept that God would probably be able to do that, and create, the Earth would only be so many years old.
Of course.
Or some scientific stuff would make you think that it could be millions or billions of years old. But I mean, really, that when we read this text, I just want to understand what is the author trying to say here?
Yeah, and I think to demand young Earth or to demand old Earth would be beyond the pale of what the author's trying to do.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that, in Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, we don't know how much time went by.
We don't know, but it doesn't matter either.
It doesn't matter. I guess I still want to maintain. I think what I'm kind of chafing against here, if you can't tell I'm chafing against something, is that a lot of time people who believe young Earth, which might be your view, I don't know, we haven't talked about that for sure yet, but a lot of times young Earthers would say, anybody who's old Earth is just trying to fit it into science. They're not translating the Bible, or they're not interpreting the Bible literally.
Right.
And I'm saying, no, I'm translating it. I'm interpreting it literally.
Yeah, from the
and
actual
1:2 is saying that the earth was in existence,
Yeah.
and we haven't gotten to day 1 yet.
Yeah.
Day 1 begins in verse 3.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that claim, and that's where we kind of demonstrated this. This is kind of where the episode started, that cliffhanger, that verse 2 was already asserting that the earth is here.
Can I share an example of something where, we don't want to answer a question that the text is not addressing.
Right.
And so our pastor gave actually a great example of this in a recent sermon. It was the story of Jesus, and they were trying to bring this crippled to Jesus, and they went through the roof. And so they they opened up the roof and they lowered this man into the house to get to Jesus. And, a lot of pastors, they will try to explain construction materials and like the ancient artifacts of like how these roofs were made and how they could have actually gone in and done all these things and the, components of the house. And all that's kind of extra biblical information.
That's right.
Our pastor was saying, we're not trying to answer what roofing materials were involved or explain any of that.
That's right.
It's like, they were trying to get the person to Jesus. And that's the point of the story, that maybe we get lost in trying to explain some of these other details that don't really matter to the point of understanding the text.
That's right.
I don't think that's controversial to say about the book of Luke 5, where that story was. So maybe it's not controversial to apply to Genesis 1. We don't need to apply this extra biblical stuff.
Right.
We can just take the text for what it is.
Yeah, and the text is asserting that God created the heavens and the earth. And we know that to be the case. And next time we will begin day 1 in Genesis 1:3, where we will learn more about how the Bible is for you and about you.